Howdy, I'm Kate Kavanaugh, and you're listening to the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast, where we're laying the groundwork for our land, ourselves, and for generations to come by looking at the way every thread of life is connected to one another. Communities above ground mirror the communities below the soil, which mirror the vast community of the cosmos. As the saying goes, as above, so below. Join me as we take a curious journey into agriculture, biology, history, spirituality, health, and so much more. I can't wait to unearth all of these incredible topics alongside you. Hello, and welcome to the Groundwork podcast, formerly the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast, where we are exploring the threads of what it means to be human woven into this earth. I have thought a lot about this week's intro and this week's guest, John Vaillant. I caught John in the week that he had been longlisted for the Pulitzer and won the Shaughnessy Prize for nonfiction for his book, Fire Weather, A True Story from a Hotter World. But John had been on my mind for over 3 months when I recorded this interview. That's how long I had spent reading all of John's work. It started with Fire Weather, where I thought that that would comprise the meat of our interview. I picked it up. I finally landed an interview with him, but I found that he was such a masterful storyteller that I had to know what was inside of his other books. And that's when I picked up The Golden Spruce, A True Story of Myth, Madness, and Greed, The Tiger, A True Story of Vengeance and Survival, and his lone fiction book, The Jaguar's Children. There is something about John's work that I continue to be captured by. It is both the people, the places, the ideas, the resources that he writes about, but it is also his writing itself. And you will hear him talk about how he thinks about writing in this episode in a way that is incredibly inspiring and with a consideration of depth and technicality that is truly incredible. Because I spent over 3 months prepping this interview over 4 books, I had so many quotes, so many ideas, so many places I could take this interview that I never could have covered all of them in the very short amount of time I had with John. I hope that he might someday consider coming back on the podcast so we can continue to explore this. And I want to talk a little bit, before we dig a little bit deeper, about what embarking on this interview meant for me personally. I poured heart and soul into this interview, into preparing this, into exploring John's work, and it illuminated something really specific for me, which is just how passionate I am about this process, about this podcast, and about being an interviewer. This is a life's dream, and I want to make this dream work for me more than ever. And I think this interview really showed me that. And I think and I hope that John had as good of a time as I did. This interview also showed me a little bit of a dark side of myself. I really became aware of the time I am willing to devote to other people's work, that I would like to be able to devote half that much time to thinking about my own work in the world. It also brought up aspects of perfectionism in myself that were interesting. I realized at the 11th hour that I hadn't read all of Fire Weather twice before the interview, and caught myself really seeing a level of perfectionism that I don't think is serving me. And I think that when we find the work that we're meant to do in this world, and I do feel that way about this podcast, it holds up a big mirror for who we are and where we have space to grow. And so I'm grateful for this process too. And I know that after this interview, it took me a while to record this introduction because I had a little bit of the post marathon blues. I had spent so much time in John's work and thinking about this interview that I didn't quite know where to go next. And it was in that space of trying to figure things out that I really took hold of what has been a developing direction for the podcast. And a lot of it was in thanks to John's work. What I found in Fire Weather and the Golden Spruce in particular, though throughout all of John's work, is an exploration of how we as humans relate to precious resources on this planet and to the idea of nature itself, which is something we've explored quite a bit on the podcast. I found that in Fire Weather, the exploration of petroleum, of our relationship with fire and combustion, that the transition from wood to coal to petroleum as our main fuel sources really shifted the time frame of humans in a lot of different ways. That wood is this resource that, while it lives a longer lifespan than we do as humans, as something that can be 500, 600, 700 or more years old, something that John explores devastatingly beautifully in his book, The Golden Spruce, it is still something that we can imagine. But as we begin the shift into the resource of coal or the resource of petroleum, which is compressed plant and animal matter over millions of years throughout these big geological forces and deep time, we can no longer understand the harnessing of time and honestly of photosynthesis that is happening. And as I did some supplementary reading for this interview with John, Václav Smil's book, Oil and Energy and Civilization, really illuminates just how much of this is going into our daily exploits. And when we talk about gasoline, there is around 40 acres of biomass that have been compressed over millions of years throughout deep time, right? And these big geological forces in a single gallon of gasoline. And that just has continued to really boggle my mind. I don't have any answers for this, but a lot of this is how we've made our world. And for those of you that have been listening, I keep coming back to this David Graeber quote that is the ultimate hidden truth of this world is that it is something that we have made and could just as easily make differently. And that is going to be has been our guiding light and will continue to be our guiding light in some coming episodes as we really explore the question of how did we get here? And I know we say that kind of flippantly and not looking for an answer, but I am taking a small stab at how we got here. And also we'll be exploring what it might mean to make this world a little bit differently. I have this quote from John here that I want to read to you. He says, historically, it has been humans who have outpaced the natural world. From arrowheads to artificial intelligence, our species has progressed steadily faster than geologic time. But now, geologic time, specifically atmospheric time and ocean time, is moving as fast as we are, in some cases faster than technology, faster than history. The world we thought we knew is changing under our feet because we changed it. I think this is a big part of where we find ourselves at this point in human history. That there is a mismatch, something that John really explores as the Lucretius problem. John says, in essence, the Lucretius problem is rooted in the difficulty humans have imagining and assimilating things outside their own personal experience. 100th percentile fire weather conditions during the hottest, driest May in recorded history, following a 2-year drought in a southern city filled with 25,000 petroleum infused boxes and surrounded by millions of desiccated trees, is something no Canadian firefighter or emergency manager had experienced. But this is the nature of 21st century fire, and not just in the boreal forest. We are increasingly seeing things that we can't really imagine, and each thing is the biggest thing we've ever seen. And I think that that poses an opportunity as much as it does a problem, which is we have an opportunity to imagine things differently. I came back to this in my interview with Kate Havstad, but so much of John's work is about consumption. It's about our consumption of resources. It's about our consumption of petroleum-based goods, whether they're the couches that are made out of, plastic petroleum-based fibers, or clothing that are made out of petroleum fibers, our consumption of resources like wood and coal and oil. And I looked up the etymology of consume, and its original meaning in the late 14th century was to destroy by separating into parts which cannot be reunited, as by burning or eating, to destroy the substance of. And so, what I'm holding right now in the podcast is the balance of what it is meant to consume and what it might mean to instead to create, to mend, to repair, to reimagine, to take those parts and to begin to reunite them into a whole, even if it is a whole with the clear fracture lines of what has changed. I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode. It is, this has been a labor of love. And so I deeply, deeply appreciate your listenership. We have some really, really cool synthesis and copaceticness with our sponsors in this podcast episode. And I want to remind you that these sponsors are built on incredible relationships and mutual respect for work and for what we're putting out in the world. And so I want to thank Redmond Real Salt and Sundry's Farm Garlic and Rob Kropfel, who is a former guest of this show and a former smoke jumper. And I hope that you see that with these ads, I'm trying to weave in parts of the story I'm telling in the episode at large so that it feels like something that is fun and fact-filled and exciting as an advertisement, and not just something that you want to skip through. And again, these people are supporting the podcast. If you want to support the podcast totally free of charge, the best thing to do is to leave a rating or review, or send this episode to someone in your life. Most podcasts spread by word of mouth. And so it is so helpful when you share the love. I want to read a recent review that I thought was really fantastic. It's from Jelly Janelli. And they say, seriously though, fan club anyone? I'm eating up these conversations and meals this rich call for company. I think I will have some ways for us to connect a little bit more in a group setting coming up, both online and in person, that I will be announcing here soon. And so I really appreciate that idea of us really coming together. And thank you for leaving that review. As a reminder, John's book, Fire Weather, is out today, June 11th, in paperback, and I cannot recommend it more. This is an incredible, these are mini stories that are woven together, some incredible characters, some incredible storytelling, and also some stunning prowess and command of the craft of writing on the part of John. I could not have been more honored to catch him in this week of celebration and reflection of fire weather. I also highly recommend picking up The Golden Spruce, which I found he did what he did in fire weather for petroleum, he does for wood in the golden spruce, to really cover some of our history of the use of this resource. Picking up the tiger, which I think is a cautionary tale around the ways in which we're butting up against nature. Not that nature is outside of us, I don't think that, but we need a way to kind of talk about this. And his devastating and beautifully crafted novel, The Jaguar's Children. All of these books I also listen to on Audible, so they're fantastic there too. Please support John's work by picking up the paperback of Fire Weather or one of these books on audiobook today. And without further ado, this incredible episode with John Vaillant. I actually wanted to start, and I wanted to say this. I wanted to say this on air to congratulate you, because you are coming off of such a week with winning the Shaughnessy and being a finalist for the Pulitzer, and it's just really exciting. And I know I know how well deserved it is, because I've gotten this incredible opportunity to spend the last 3 months going through all of your books, and some books that I felt supported it. I read Václav Smil's Energy and Civilization, and just kind of digging into this subject. And I came back to, I was watching the Turn Every Page documentary the other weekend with Robert Caro and Robert Gottlieb. Robert Caro, who wrote the Power Broker.
Yes,
and
I gotta watch that.
Robert Caro said something that I came back to and felt really relevant about your books. And he said that, I've always felt that if a nonfiction book is going to endure, the level of prose in it, the narrative, the rhythm, etc., the setting of scenes has to be at the same level as a great work of fiction that endures. And I have to tell you, in reading all of your books, each one of them, and I took my time with each of them because I've had time to prep, really stayed with me in a big way. And it started opening doors to other ideas and other works of nonfiction. And I just wanted to express my gratitude at the outset for that.
Wow, what a wonderful thing to hear, and it's just been an incredibly bounteous week, and this is kind of more. I feel like I'm in a giant greenhouse in a way, and there's these begonias and all kinds of really lush flowers and air all around. So that's I really appreciate that, and I also really resonate to that comment about aiming for great fiction. And I don't. It might sound presumptuous to say this, but I'm writing for the ages. That's what I'm aiming for.
You are,
and partly because those are the books I read. The books that I grew up reading from a child, are books that last, and they're more like features on a landscape than ephemeral things blowing through. And so that's what I've always resonated to. And so it would make sense, that I would aim for that. And really resonate to that.
I think you've achieved it. I think that they really last because they speak to something deeper. And I know that you and I have talked about this before, but what I wanted to do was to try to pull out some big themes that are present. And and I want you to, it's your work, so feel free to dive in. But one of the first things that I really came back to in reading all four of them was our relationship to the natural world, to resources, and to our own predilection for consumption, for lack of a better word. And I came back to, and I thought I'd open us here, and longtime listeners will know that I love etymology. I think that it has a lot to tell us and can be very revealing. And I came back to the etymology for consume, because I thought about the way that the fire consumed this town in fire weather, and what consumption meant in terms of the tiger, in terms of the way that we are consuming the habitat of others. I thought about our appetite for resources in terms of fuel, whether that's petroleum or wood in the golden spruce. and two, in the Jaguar's children, especially through the lens of Santa May's, to consume a culture through the lens of what happened post NAFTA, to consume ways of life and traditions. And the consume comes from the late 14th century, and its original meaning was to destroy by separating into parts which cannot be reunited, as by burning or eating.
Wow. Wow. That, yeah, I just got a chill when you said that. I did not know that. And nor had I made half of the connections that you just made around my work. And that's really the joy of sharing it with others, is you're just bringing, a different intelligence, a different angle of
Yeah.
approach, and a whole different suite of associations. And so really you just kind of expanded the things I've been trying to do in some really interesting ways. And boy, that things being in a way kind of destroyed beyond repair is, yeah, certainly a through line, not one that I didn't, I wasn't approaching it or attempting it in a first degree way. It clearly is something I'm working out. I've got
Yeah.
4 books now, and I sort of made a half baked attempt at kind of psychoanalyzing myself and what's going on here. And they do feel like the same book, and people say that about novelists, they're just writing the same book over and over. Probably the same with many nonfiction
Mm.
writers. You're wrestling with you're just working over these themes again and again and again.
Yeah.
And but I hadn't really, that type of appetite and
Mhm. Mm.
the transformative impacts of that of such an appetite hadn't really been part of my analysis. So that's thanks for expanding that.
Yeah.
And it really rings true for me.
Good. I think the word appetite there is really interesting, because I saw that. I came back to, I kind of closed out with the tiger, actually, which was an interesting order to do things. And I kind of came back to this idea of surplus killing, of what the human animal is, and
Yeah,
that we are unique in terms of animals. I try to avoid a lot of hierarchical things in terms of reminding us that as Homo sapiens, or Homo flagrans, as you would call it, that we are animals, but that one of the things that we do is we take more than we need. And
yeah,
that I saw the way that humans were reflected in your work when you look at them in contrast with fire, which I couldn't believe how much we had in common with fire, and what was different when you look at us in terms of a tiger and their incredible predatory nature, and yet this stark contrast that they only take what they need.
yeah,
And also to look at it through the lens of a forest, and to just see that devastation that we had brought in our pursuit for fuel, for shelter, for this material, and later for petroleum as well, and both at the same time, concurrently too.
I think that's a real common feature that we share with fire, is both of us have this predilection, almost a compulsion to overreach.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
like Manhattan, the island of Manhattan, which wasn't very thickly settled in 1700, had already been so thoroughly denuded of trees that they were importing firewood to Manhattan in 1700. And the population obviously was a tiny fraction of who's there now. And so there's this constant, I think greed is too simple a way to put it. It's just this kind of compulsive ambition
Mm.
to to reach farther, to push as far out as we can go, and until collapse. And that's certainly what fire does. It burns until it burns out, and something either shuts it down, or it runs out of fuel, or runs out of oxygen. And it certainly does not stop voluntarily. It just has no there's no governor built into that engine to conserve energy, or measure it out, to mete it out in any kind of thoughtful, forward-looking way. And to look at our behavior, and to look at the power of a statement. I can't remember if it was Donald Rumsfeld or Dick Cheney who said it. They were all saying stuff like that, which is the American way of life is non-negotiable, which is really. That's the oxygen talking. That's fire talk. That fire would say the same thing, and that's what's literally brewing right now outside of Fort McMurray. Again, as we speak, there's a very intense fire out there, and they're really leaning on this thing with air tankers and crews. But the fire, is defiant, and you are not going to limit me. And that is, sort of the American message, especially post-war, and that has been sold through the medium of petroleum to the rest of the world, I feel. And we can all have it all, and we can all take it all. And the virtue is to be as big as you can. And that, I don't think that is necessarily a moral failing in Homo sapiens. I think it's what oxygen encourages. And it's one of the possibilities. It's one of the ways of being that planet Earth has allowed to be possible. And so to go in that direction is natural in its way. The fact that we can reflect on what we do gives us more responsibility. But if you look at any species, whether it's snowshoe hares or lemmings or bacteria, it wants to multiply and amplify as far as it goes, and then it will only stop when it hits some limit.
Today's guest, John Vaillant, and his book Fire Weather, A True Story from a Hotter World, is in part the story of the Fort McMurray fire that raged out of control in the boreal forest of Canada. I can't believe how excited I am to introduce one of our sponsors, Sundry's Farm Garlic, for this week's podcast, and how beautifully it connects with our conversation around fire. It's wildfires like the one at Fort McMurray that Sundry's Farm founder Robert Kropfel parachuted into in order to help put them out during his 15-year career as a smoke jumper. It was actually on an assignment in New Mexico that Rob had the idea that farming garlic might work in conjunction with his hectic smoke jumping schedule during fire season on the small farm he shares with his wife, daughter, and dogs in Idaho. Fast forward over 8 years, and Rob is growing some of the best garlic around. Sundry's Farm is perched over the Snake River in Idaho, where hard and soft-neck garlic varietals are hand-grown with the best practices you can imagine. No petroleum-based fertilizers here, just fish emulsion and kelp and blood meal for fertilizer alongside the rich volcanic soil of the Hagerman Valley. The garlic is certified white rot free and is also free of herbicides and pesticides. The best part for me is the flavor and the big, juicy cloves, which are perfect for planting and growing more big, juicy cloves, and also perfect for easy peeling in the kitchen. And the flavor, it's not out of this world in the best way. It's totally of this world. Rich spice, notes of citrus, and deep earthiness grace varietals like Purple Glazer and Enchilium Red. Support this former smoke jumper and his absolutely incredible family, I know because I know them, by using them for your culinary and seed garlic needs. Explore a wide range of hard and soft neck varietals in grab bags for both planting and culinary needs by going to sundriesfarm.com. That's SUNDRIESFARM.com to pre-order seed and culinary garlic for the year with shipping beginning in September. There's no code necessary, just head to sundriesfarm.com. Let's get back to our interview with John. and fire weather, I believe you talk about cyanobacteria really changing the atmosphere into something that destroyed it for a great number of other things at one point as it becomes more oxygen rich, right? And this very narrow window, this Goldilocks zone in which fire can exist in terms of the oxygen. But I also, and coming back to this, like why are humans the only animal that doesn't seem to have this recognition of limits of that sort of top level? And I as you were talking, I had pulled this little piece from Václav Smil in Energy and Civilization, where he says at the end, a fundamental distinguishing characteristic of our species has been the extension of these physical limits through a more efficient use of muscles and through the harnessing of energies outside our own bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
coming back to that we have harnessed petroleum, that we have harnessed the power of fire, really, whether we're burning wood or petroleum or coal, to create energy that exists outside of us, and that is particularly unique to us.
Well, it's we have think of the film Avatar and that those very compelling amp suits that you can step inside, and when I look at a Ford F-150, that's all I can think of.
Yeah.
That's an amp suit for the guy driving it. And
Yeah.
it does almost all the things that the amp suit does, just on wheels. And it's not quite as heavily armored, but pretty close. It's a weapon. And it's just an amplifier, and it's very, very versatile. I want to push back a little bit on something you said, though.
Yeah.
I don't think we are the only one that what did you say? You said, forgive me.
that
I
that
want to
you,
get back to this because it's this idea that um, we we're the
the
only one
harnessing.
who doesn't impose limits, but all the other, like what the snowshoe hare
Yeah.
or the lemon, the only thing that imposes limits on their reproduction and expansion is a food shortage or a plague, and
Mm.
that's what limits them. Otherwise, they will just go and go and go, and
Hmm.
look at the houses
Yeah.
in Fort McMurray after the fire. They were just full of flies and full of mice, and everything was just multiplying, multiplying, multiplying until they burnt themselves out.
Mhm.
And that the tension for us, the complicating factor for us, is we have that same impulse, but we also have a consciousness, and that creates this incredible dissonance for us. I think. On
Yeah.
the one hand, there's this natural animal oxygen driven compulsion to grow and grow and grow and grow.
Mm.
And it's a kind of zest for life. Again, I think we have to take that. It has all this moral baggage in the case of human beings, but it isn't moral. It's just what we're allowed to do here on this incredibly generous planet. But then we also have this awareness, and so the two things: one, we have the awareness that we have this impulse, and we could actually temper it if we wanted to. But we also have this unparalleled ability to amplify ourselves on top of what we're already capable of. And so, really, the negative way to look at it is, metastasizing cancer cells, just kind of multiplying mindlessly and in this super energetic way. Or there's also just this genius for adaptation and creation, and we're compulsive creators. And so that's, a lot of this comes out of a really positive impulse. We look at these hands, and look at these frontal lobes we have, and look what they're capable of. And then nature has given us this incredible uh, kind of palette and toolkit to draw from, to mix any color and to make any device. And it's really, that part, it's so joyful in a way, in terms of just the exuberance of life and creation. And just when you multiply that by 8 billion, or you refract it through the psychology of a human being who might be angry or vengeful or motivated by fear, then it turns into other things that obviously are super destructive.
Yeah. Yeah. I think absolutely. And I think also I think we're inculcated in a society that puts some guardrails on us that we might not always even be aware of, that we might not always see entirely. That I come back often to the David Graeber quote, like we've imagined this world and we could just as easily reimagine it a different way. I've just butchered that rather terribly, but to the point being that we are an incredibly creative species, that really is what has gotten us here. That I often feel like it's a mix of our thumbs and our imaginations, our ability to tell story, which I think you address really beautifully in The Tiger too. Go ahead.
But just thinking, and fire,
Yeah,
we would
yeah.
not
Oh,
we
it's
would not be who we are without fire, including the narrative piece. When you think of gathering around the light, it's dark, it's unsafe to be out there because there are predators out there. So we stay by the light, stare into those flames, and we pass the time. And one of the ways we do that, we could be sewing, or we could be cooking, or we could be picking nits off ourselves, or we could be, working our tongues and larynx and making sounds and making tones and harmonizing and singing and, laying beats down and eventually working out grammar.
Yes. And telling stories, right? This was the
Exactly.
place where we
Yeah.
distilled whatever that was, whatever the essence of our day was, whatever we learned or whatever mythologies we had to share about where we came from and what we were doing.
Yeah, I think so. You go out and do your day, and it's very physical, very active, not without risk. And then you come back, and you have this built-in time, night, with light from the fire to process what you've been through. And it's kind of like a sort of a check-in time, or it's like the diurnal think tank, and you all get in there again every night. It's guaranteed, and you might not do the same things each time, but you're always checking back. There's always that reference point. There's the fire, there's the group, there's the safety of it, there's the fact that we need to kind of close ranks here, and that's I think that is almost a universal. I'm sure there are exceptions. Ask any anthropologist, but in most cases, there's this small unit that comes back into the circle, and generally there's some kind of firelight in that circle, and you do that for 10 or 20, 30,000 years, and some interesting things are going to happen, and there's going to be some real cohesion and unanimity
Mm.
that comes out of that, as well as something really sophisticated. If you come back and you just keep working it and keep working it, and I've just been marveling at the English language lately, and how versatile and generous it is, and how capable of nuance, and it really took some. It took I'd love to know more about that, the early stages of language, and when the grunts began to have two syllables or different tones, and um, yeah, so
Yeah, I think, I've heard you talk about language in terms of wanting to, in fire weather, like how many times that you had to re explain a fire, and each time feels novel and feels very present. It feels visceral. I think there is a visceralness in general to your writing. And I also think a lot about language, and I think a lot about what that means, because this is when we're around that fire, and I do think that along with hunting is kind of the origins of story, of where we begin to tell story, and you need language for story. You need this shared space where you can come together because we all have our own perceptions of the world, the backgrounds, the histories that we carry with us into how we view the world. But this is our shared way of communicating across that boundary of inner terrain to outer
Yeah.
terrain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how incredibly essential it is to continuing to tell this ever changing story of what it means to be humans in a shifting landscape. Did you know that salt is very hard to burn? It actually has a melting point of over 1400 degrees Fahrenheit and is pretty great at putting out small grease fires in the kitchen. I'm not recommending that you purchase salt from this week's sponsor, Redmond Real Salt, for this purpose, but I am suggesting you purchase their salt to flavor the food you make with fire. The domestication of fire occurred around 1 million years ago, and that's when we started cooking our food with flame. And according to anthropologists like previous guest Dr. Bill Schindler, it did a lot to change our bodies and our brains. This summer, as you safely fire up your grills, fire pits, burners, and cook your food, there's nothing better for seasoning than Redmond Real Salt. I love that their salt comes direct from mine to table here in the USA from an ancient seabed around before the time of plastics and pollutants. It's chock full of over 60 minerals that give it a flavor that is deep, earthy, and a little bit sweet. They even have seasoning mixes with organic spices to take all the guesswork out of your grill night, and smoked salt if you want to bring a little bit of the grill into your kitchen. If these hot days have you sweating like they do me, you'll love their Relight Hydration Powder made with Redmond salt, coconut water powder, and super bioavailable magnesium glycinate. The point? Beat the heat with Redmond Real Salt by using the code MindBodySoil_15 for 15% off Redmond Real Salt products by going to redmond.life. Again, that's the code MindBodySoil_15 for 15% off when you go to redmond.life or hit the link in the show notes.
Well, that raises an interesting question, which is, why don't we just use the same words all the time? And we do. And in certain ways, if you're going to the gas station or something, you use very specific language. But when we're telling stories to each other, what we respond to is the surprising image, the unpredictable, the unanticipated juxtaposition of words. And that is thrilling to me. And I think I learned that from basically looking at New Yorker cartoons when I was a kid. It's just there's always a twist or a surprise, and it gives at least me, and I know obviously millions of other people, tremendous pleasure to be tricked like that, and then you catch on to it, and so there's something about us. Why do we like jokes? It's because we didn't see it coming, and so we like that surprise. It's like a benign surprise. It's not like opening the door and there's a tiger in there waiting for you. It's a much more. But I almost wonder if those are on the same scale. A difference of degree, not of kind. And it's that little hit of the joke and the surprise, and I really confronted that consciously with fire weather, because there aren't that many words for fire. And I think I really kept a leash on myself around using the word blaze, which is sort of a default in a newspaper, and I think I might have used it once or twice. And likewise, inferno, Holocaust, I think I used both of those only once. And there's fires happening throughout the entire book. So then I use the word fire almost like the name of a character. I thought about capitalizing it, and I chose not to. But so I just resign myself to, I'm just going to call it the fire. I'm not going to try to come up with fancy words because I'm going to run out after 5 words. And then, but after that, the fire is doing all these things, and it incinerates, it immolates, it this, and that. And that too gets old pretty quickly. So it really felt like a kind of supreme challenge of my craft to find ways to articulate it. And I really kind of cantilevered pretty far out in terms of comparing flames, running through treetops to troops of lemurs and gibbons. But that is really, I think it's apt, and there are both ambitious, oxygen driven, group oriented, forward moving entities,
Absolutely.
and I just, that's the, frankly, part of the joy of it. There's a lot of tedium in writing,
Hmm.
and you are alone a lot, and sort of being alone for off and on for 7 years is too much for anybody. And so to be in there, and then in my mind to get to see the lemurs and gibbons jumping through the trees, and then the fire, jumping through the trees, that created a very um, compelling and diverting world to inhabit for a while. And so um, I think, you're in fire weather in particular, you're sort of seeing in some ways my own efforts to keep myself engaged in what was a
Mm.
grueling marathon.
Yeah. Yeah, and a subject matter that I think really is heavy, and I've heard you speak about. I mean, just the weight of writing this, and we spoke a little bit before then, and I think that you do a beautiful job. I want to go back to something you said, that there's this sort of benign surprise and sort of play in, for example, the New Yorker, this juxtaposition, and I like that because I think that a lot of your work is sort of putting things in comparison, in juxtaposition,
Yeah,
so that I don't know quite what it is, so that you can feel your own tangible place within it. There is something
mm,
about that contrast that sort of crystallizes where you fall in it. And I know that you've said, a lot of your work are, this is a quote from you, stories about collisions of human ambitions and the natural world where it doesn't go according to the human plan,
mhm,
which is something I love because it kind of offers us that surprise, but it is that juxtaposition of us and fire, that juxtaposition of us and a tiger, even that juxtaposition. And I came back to this passage a lot in The Jaguar's Children, of the mural on the building at the university in Mexico, where it's juxtaposing the milpa farmers of the campesinos with the Santa Mays. You call it,
yeah,
it's an
yeah,
ocean of just a monocrop of corn
yeah,
with no
yeah,
people in it. And so
yeah,
often coming back to these contrasts that I do think put you on the sort of knife's edge of where you, the reader, are in
yeah.
in the work and in the environment, to begin to sort of bridge that separation between us and nature and our environment.
Yeah, that there's something thrilling to me and really compelling about the somehow bringing the alien and the familiar into some kind of common space and figuring out how they relate to and inform each other. And
Mm,
there's a real dynamism there. I think of almost of like, magnets with reverse polarity that are
yeah.
repelling each other, but there's a lot of energy in that space between them. And then, you can also, you flip it around and align it a different way, and then they'll suck together and connect.
Mm,
And so, exploring that with, since a lot of the books are technical and mechanical, and, like, there's nothing more boring, than bitumen. Believe me, I've read a lot about bitumen, and so to be able to write about it in a compelling way, that frankly was sort of my final exam thus far as a writer. Being able to try to make bitumen interesting, because it's eye glazingly dull, and even fire, as charismatic as it is to look at, and we sort of think we know what it is, but we don't really know what it is. We've just sort of achieved some kind of shorthand comfort with it, so that I know what that is. Kind of like I know what oil and gas is. Well, but we really don't generally, unless you're a petrochemist. And so, trying to explain that, I don't know why I'm compelled to do that, but I am, is is really challenging, and it's it's so easy to be boring. It's very dry material. Once you start getting it into hydrocarbons, and I'd really just start going to sleep. And so I'm trying to keep myself away. I know, kind of out of a taking the responsibility of being a human being on earth, I need to understand these processes that are shaping my life and changing the world under my feet. So I need to understand this, but how do I explain it in a way that I can understand, that doesn't make me want to nap, and that then I can share with readers in a way that will excite them rather than make them feel like, okay, this is the medicine paragraph, and I'm just going to have to grind through this. And I hope there's something juicy at the end or some reward at the end. And there is there is a kind of punishment reward rhythm in certain sections of I think of my nonfiction, where you're trying to get into how the thing actually works, but then have this payoff. So now that you know how it works, this is the crazy stuff that it does, and here it's doing something you never imagined it would do, and this is how this person dealt with that. And so, you hope that the reader will trust you to, really to grind through those few sentences to get to that place where you sort of get the dessert.
I have to say, I love this description, and and I have to tell you, I became so fascinated by bitumen and by deposits of petroleum that I've actually been emailing with geologists. Like, it brought up questions that Václav Smil's oil couldn't answer, and this desire to understand. But I think that something that you're doing that I find is critically important is that you are providing a tangible connection back to parts of our world and our environment that are absolutely critical to our lives. When we talk about our lives, and Fireweather illustrates this beautifully, and the golden spruce does too, when we're talking about resources that we are, and I think about this a lot, we used to move our bodies to resources. Now we move resources to our bodies, post-agricultural revolution anyway. We don't see or understand what these are. And you made petroleum, you made wood and the many products, petroleum and the many iterations of it, right? This absolute chameleon that we dress ourselves in petroleum, and we go to sleep on petroleum, and we side our houses in petroleum, and we also put it in our gas tank. And what it represents and what it is, like what this thing that is inside our earth actually is, and just how much is going into it, right? I think it's 40 acres of biomass for a single gallon of gasoline. Just the amount of photosynthetic and power over time that this thing represents. And you made that so real. And I think that's important, because I think we open up these headlines, we see these things, and it doesn't feel like anything we understand. The words, as we just discussed, it's not enough.
I really am resonating to that, because I'm so conscious of how mindless so much of our behavior is, and how much, especially our consumption. And, we have a cat, you might have heard him meowing. And when I pour the kibbles into his bowl, he has no curiosity about where those kibbles came from. He knows where the box is. He's really interested in the box. But beyond that, he has no curiosity. He has no curiosity about it. And what's kind of embarrassing and frankly frightening to think, human beings are almost the same.
Yeah.
All we care about the gas station is that there's no one at the bay that we want to park in, and that the gas comes out, and we grumble at the price, and that is as far as it goes.
Yes.
And maybe we notice, the tandem trailer full, of a neighborhood burning amount of gasoline parked there at 6 in the morning, filling up the reservoirs underneath the station. But other than that, we have no concept. And we read about Saudi Arabia or the Gulf of Mexico, but not connecting the dots. And there's really no investment, and there's certainly no calculus of what's the real cost, again, of our appetite. What is that doing to the Gulf of Mexico? What's it doing to our air? What's it doing to our bodies? And our lack of curiosity is has gotten us to where we are now, and in part, and so nature is now answering the questions we didn't think to ask, and it's saying this is how you're affected by your appetites. This is how you're affected by your deep investment and in a way, captivity to petroleum. And look what it's doing to your health. Look what it's doing to the climate. And so there's this kind of closing in that I feel. And we used to be able to kind of keep these spaces. And when you think of like the very early days of global trade, nutmeg came from an inconceivably remote place, and it arrived in a small form that was, you could enormously valuable, and you enjoyed using it, but there was no sense of the impact on people, on environment, on anything. And now that's closing down, and we have less room to maintain that illusion.
Yes. And I think, yes, absolutely. And I think that curiosity is a big piece of this. As I've been thinking about this, and I think something you just spoke to, this lack of curiosity at something that is rather miraculous in a lot of ways, at least through the lens of the rest of human history, that I can go over there and I can turn on a light switch, and through a lot of copper and an amazing, incredible amount of infrastructure, electricity that is being generated by a fuel source, whether that's coal or natural gas or wind or nuclear, which required other places, right? It was mined and it came from some other away. And we can kind of keep following that. But I do that, and the sun turns on inside of this room in a way that is unfathomable to at any for 99.9% of human history. The same with when I pull the tap water. And when I fill my tank of gas, that there are massive externalities not considered, and that this is a really big piece that we have to get curious about what is unseen, about what we take for granted.
That I think is part of I kind of recognize that tendency toward incuriosity, and which in a way is, I think it's kind of the most despicable human trait, and I own my own incuriosity about a lot of things, and so in a way, what I'm responding to is my own sort of horror at my capacity for taking things for granted. And the fact is, we're born into the worlds we're born into,
Yes.
and I was born into a world where my parents carried me into an automobile, and we smelled the gas, we smelled the exhaust. My associations with that are I'm going on a trip with my parents. That's a nice thing to do. And I talked to a woman who grew up in a logging town, and she'd come, her dad would come home and pick her up, and there's daddy, and he smells of cigarettes and chainsaw oil and freshly cut trees. And so imagine being a boy, you're going into the forest. I'm going into the woods to go logging, and it smells like dad. So at a pre-verbal, non-intellectual level, it just smells right. It just feels normal. And so if you grew up in Fort McMurray, and there's another north wind blowing. You can smell the cokers, and there's more cancer there. There's more asthma there, but
Of course.
we've got 2 trucks, and we get to go to Las Vegas and Disney World every year, and I feel good about myself because I have these things, and so I can. It makes sense that we would take that for granted, that we would accept it, and the same way we accept the sunrise. This is just what's normal, and that is part of the genius, I think, of marketing and of these incredible engineers who populate our world, is that they make it feel easy and seamless. They make it feel natural.
Yes. At least
And
for us here in sort of the Western or the global North.
in this very kind of rarefied, privileged situation that that we're in, and that's pretty much the audience I'm writing for. So
Yeah.
there's this right there is this whole other set of limitations and stratifications that uh, also kind of have to be acknowledged and addressed, and just in a way, we're kind of constantly calibrating incredible inequity and imbalance, or trying to hold it at bay. And yeah, it's we're I'm at a loss for words.
One of the things I've sort of grappled with in exploring your work and some of the other work I'm looking at is this almost coerced complicity in the sort of machinations of late stage
Yeah,
capitalism, right?
yeah,
We're inculcated in these spaces.
yeah,
We
yeah.
become dependent or captive. You mentioned the word captivity earlier. We are captive by them and must hold an amount of cognitive dissonance. And you had a piece, I think it was in Fireweather. I did a bad job of labeling my quotes, but you said in this sense, oh, this is definitely Golden Spruce. In this sense, logging isn't so different from the Marine Corps, medical school, or even storytelling. For many of us, even the couch-bound readers of books, some sort of blood sacrifice is necessary in order to validate the experience. Of course, any of our lives, closely examined, can be found to hold gross inconsistencies. Slaughterhouse workers, loggers, and stockbrokers are simply less insulated from them than the rest of us who benefit from their labors. It seems that in order to succeed or even function in this world, a certain tolerance for moral and cognitive dissonance is necessary.
I'd forgotten I'd written that, but I stand by it, and I feel quite proud that I wrote that.
You
Um,
should.
yeah, that I'm trying to remember getting, and so that's what I'm grappling with all the time. I think that's what every book is about.
Mm,
Is that dissonance and our capacity for holding that dissonance, and when the
yeah,
dissonance, when the barriers, the insulators break down or fray, and
yeah,
the dissonance becomes palpable or even unbearable. And
yeah.
and that's what I think, that's what the climate is expressing to us right now, is that dissonance is no longer um, effective, and the barriers we've built are no longer capable of holding it, and or
Yes.
holding it at bay. And so that's it's this moment of kind of multidimensional reckoning that we're in right now. And I think that's what each book is maybe about, is these moments when individuals uh, are confronted with this inescapable reckoning, within the context of their own lives, whether it's the
Mm,
real price of logging, or the real price of petroleum, or the real price of genetically modified corn, or the real price of hiring someone to smuggle you across a border, and what drove you to do that. And likewise, when the government breaks down, and the citizens are thrown back into the arms of the forest, and there are tigers in that forest too, and there's a market for their body parts, and so yeah, that when all the when all the ornament comes off, when all the padding is pulled out, what's under there. And it's a kind of flaying of our of the construct that we've made, and it's ugly and painful, and I am drawn to it over and over.
Yeah, inescapable reckoning and flaying, and I think I mean, I wanna say at the outset, thank you for doing that work, because I think that any time that you are peeling back the layers, to get at the core of something, or as close as you can, to see this world for what it is, or to see a piece of the world for what it is, to flay something open in that way is not easy. And and to come to terms with that reckoning, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, if that it has been one of the driving themes of your book, to come to terms with that reckoning, that closeness, that flaying time and time again, is no small thing.
Well, you're the guinea pig. You're that's the part that you do by yourself in the room, in your office, is, yeah, you're peeling the layers back on yourself. And I'm the kind of crash test dummy for
Mm.
all the ideas and the explanations and the theories and I just assume I'm really not that different from other people. The main difference is I'm willing to sit with it longer.
Mm.
But other than that, I'm a pretty regular person who, you know, is pretty routinized in the way he lives and has these expectations, a lot of which are unconscious. And um, so I kind of test out these theories on myself and then assume that I'm enough of a sort of every person that other people will relate to it also. And I've been vindicated,
Yeah.
frankly. And it really feels good. Um, and partly because I also, that's where the interviews with others who are living in whatever that dilemma is, even more directly than I am. Uh, that's we kind of triangulate, and so I get raw information from them, and that's where a lot of the visceral energy
Mm.
in the book comes from. Are just these extraordinary situations that the protagonists are confronted with, really superhuman type situations where they have to really reach deep into themselves and explore the limits of what they can tolerate. And then, um, so they become kind of avatars for whatever the dilemma is. And then I can kind of run that through kind of my own filter and processor and try to render that into something that someone who has no knowledge of that world can still relate to. That's what my job is how can I put you in the forest? How can I put you in the fire? How can I put you in the mouth of a tiger? And that, that's sort of the most exhilarating thing I can imagine is,
Mm.
it's being able to do that,
I did it, and
trying
you
to.
missed welded shut water tanker,
Yeah.
putting you in those spaces too.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, when you're the guinea pig, like, what are you looking for in yourself that tells you that you have hit on this space of making something tangible, making something real? Because I know you're doing the interviews, and I thought about that leading up to this interview. You interview people all the time, and with great depth and expertise and ability to see them. So what is that in yourself that you recognize that feels like what you're looking for as that guinea pig, as the canary in the coal mine?
It's who is there? Some senator who said, I can't define pornography for you, but I know it when I see
Yeah,
it. And I think to be a writer, you just have to have. I don't know what the quote is, but man, I know it when I hear it. And
yeah.
I'll be talking to somebody, and I might be years away from publishing the book, or even writing the chapter, and that's going in the book. That's going in the book. That detail's going in the book, and I never forget it. because it's just so arresting. Like, when Carol Christian, this was really early on in the interview process for Fireweather, and we were eating breakfast in Fort McMurray, and she said, when she came back after the fire was over and the city had been evacuated for a month, and she's returning to her neighborhood that is gone, and she's standing where her 5-story condo used to be, and she said, to see your bathtub in your furnace, now that's a sight to behold. And you can talk about it all you want, but nothing, that's like a Hieronymus Bosch painting.
Yeah.
And she's a regular person, but she's just describing what she saw. That's all. There's no embellishment. It's just the facts. And it's so shocking and violating. And it really practically makes me weep just to even think about it again, And she kept it together telling me that, but, just you're really, the membranes are all pulled back, and you're really into just the raw experience of existence, and just, how ruthless the world can be. And the fact that she was still upright and communicating to me in this generous, open, coherent way, when she had every reason to be an incoherent puddle, on the floor. And the strength of the human spirit and her love for her town. She came back to her town to live there. And she doesn't live there anymore, but for a couple of years she stayed there. And these are people who don't strike you when you see them walking down the street, and then you find this inner it's hard to talk about without sounding a bit hackneyed, but just there's a substance there and a fiber there, and just the capacity for the human mind and soul to metabolize experience and keep going is mind-boggling to me. So I'm really in awe of people like that, and we need to meet them. We need to spend more time with them.
I couldn't agree more. I've spent my career in agriculture, which, in a different space of agriculture, but I think that I've met a lot of those people, and I think your work speaks volumes about that. And I think going into, I came back a lot as I was reading through your work to the idea of boom towns and the people that populate them. This sort of first line of oftentimes extraction, and what is left after, in that aftermath, whether it's the aftermath of a fire or when there's no more boom. I came back, and I can't tell you quite why, but you say this prayer in the Golden Spruce. Dear Lord, give us one more boom. We promise not to piss this one away. And I came back to that a lot in preparing this interview, but also the grit of these people and the amount of resiliency that is there. And so I think you speak to that beautifully is really just what I have to say about that.
Thanks. And that little adage is, or that little prayer is, it's written on a lot of bathrooms across northern Canada, or bathroom walls. And that resilience you're speaking of, I think it's because there's no choice. It's really like the boats have been burned, and so you either fight your way to the center of the city or you're going to die. And I think that's how it is for a lot of folks. There is simply no other choice. There's no backstop or other resource for them but to keep going.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of nobility in that, and also it's sort of a nobility and a tragedy all at once.
Yeah. And I mean, I also I mean, I superimposed that prayer, that whatever you want to call it, onto where I think we consistently find ourselves, right? Just sort of
Yeah.
in the greater sense of things. I wonder if we might go back to, we've kind of talked about the separation between us and nature, and something else that I tried to reconcile throughout all of your writing was the sense of time,
Huh.
and the way that you play with time. I mean, when we're talking about oil, when we're talking about petroleum, we're talking about the embodied energy of sunlight, right? Liquid sunshine that is made that way through millions and millions of years. And in a tree, we're talking about something, a little bit more imaginable to our human time scale, in terms of 600, 700, 800 years, for at least for a Sitka spruce. And sort of I have all of these different quotes for you, but looking at what a forest has to give us in terms of looking at forest time, and then looking at human time, you have a beautiful moment in Fire Weather where you reflect on that when in your lifetime, you have touched people and shared conversation with people that were born before the rise of petroleum, that
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
Petrocene
Yeah.
age
Yeah.
is so accelerated. And I came back to that idea of accelerant, because so much of the
Yeah.
Fort McMurray
Totally.
fire is
Right.
about
Yeah.
accelerant and
Not, yeah.
acceleration. And I'm going
Exactly.
to bring this back around, that we're kind of converging. And you had an op-ed in the New York Times just this past March, and you said, historically, it has been humans who have outpaced the natural world. From arrowheads to artificial intelligence, our species has progressed steadily faster than geologic time. But now, geologic time, specifically atmospheric time and ocean time, is moving as fast as we are, in some cases faster than technology, faster than history. The world we thought we knew is changing under our feet because we changed it. And so I just want to kick that to you, and the ways that you tugged at all of these different intersecting time scales throughout your books. And I mean, just the time, right? The time from when a tiger launches at you, and how that dilates time.
Yeah. There's I think, it's kind of a cinematic, I wasn't thinking about drone cameras when I was writing, but that is sort of what's happening, of a kind of zooming in and zooming out from the general to the intimate to the um, geologic to the momentary. Uh, we're living in these kind of parallel, simultaneous time signatures all the time. Sitting next to me is some lilac blossoms, that in a vase, that and they will have they will have lost it, in the next 3 or 4 days. They're sitting in a clay pot that's about 70 years old and that could last for another 3,000 years, no problem. And I'm somewhere in the middle, and uh, then you're kind of serving the action, serving the narrative. Do I need to get in close here for maximum impact, or do I pull back? And I think some of it's modulation. Like I think about music a lot when I'm writing, and we've all heard people read in a monotonous way. We've all read language that has a kind of relentless cadence that eventually, just knocks us out. And so I'm aware of that. So I really try to change the size of a sentence, the length of the sentence, the different ways that it leans, or the different ways that it's constructed. And so, that's what's going on at the sentence level. But then even at the action level, to you know to to scope, to zoom out, and then home in, and to do it sometimes quickly, sort of with a jump cut. If you were filmmaking, it also jars the reader out of whatever stupor they might be descending into because they just ate a hamburger. And so that I think about where the reader's at, and what I'm asking them to do. I'm asking them to basically stay with me while I monologue for 300 pages, and I'm really conscious of the ask. That's a big ask, especially now. And so I really have to make it worth their while, and I really have to do things that will not only make it interesting for me, but keep them a little bit off balance, and in a good way, in a helpful way that keeps your energy up, but that also serves what the needs are, like to get into a tiger's mouth and to look at it, the columns of the incisors, like the entrance to a temple, and it's how cool, it's really, but it's true. And so, and then to zoom out into across time is, it's part of just the joy of being able to be a writer and do that. I can literally just sit there in a room that Billy Connolly, the poet, flying, sailing alone around the room. We know who that poet is. Super famous. Yeah, I think it's Billy. It's not Connolly, but anyway, I hope you can edit that in somehow.
I will. I'll edit it in.
One of his best books it's called Sailing Alone Around the Room, and that's what writers get to do, and that's that example you gave of when I went back, trying, how do you express to people who are born into oil? That's all we know is cars.
Yeah.
How do you convey to them how short a time it really is, that it wasn't always that way? And even if you ask them intellectually, they know it wasn't always that way. But I could say, look, I'm not even a really old person, and even I knew people who lived before there were cars, and that's how new it is.
Yeah.
And so to accept it as permanent, to assume that it has a right to be because it's always been, is a fallacy. But it's also one way that the petroleum industry manipulates us into thinking that it's a permanent feature.
Yeah.
It's anything but.
Yes, this is not inevitable. It can be reimagined. I mean, I come back to that so consistently, and I think that something that you do, and a word that's come up a couple of times, is you triangulate and put the reader in that contrast of time scales, whether what you just said, the lilac in a vase that could, this very transient flower in a vase that could last centuries. And I came back, I pulled, honestly, I actually didn't even include it in here. I pulled something personally. You were talking about, I think it was Davidson in The Golden Spruce for Haida Gwaii, talking about the idea of a knife's edge and time as a spiral, right? That on the inner curve of that knife, if you think about a knife as a circle, is the past, and on the outside is the future. And if you can, and it's not easy, if you can walk that blade and be in the present now. And I think that when you're doing this, which you do so masterfully, and to hear you talk about the technical aspects of the creation of a sentence is amazing. But I think it puts us in what is a very precious, like this moment, this now is very precious, and we need to be present for it, because we are on a precipice. We are on a different blade's edge. And at the same time, we have to understand the confluence of factors, this built space, the space that some of these petroleum companies, that marketing has inculcated us in, these sort of boundaries to our world that make it feel so inevitable. And I think that you're playing with time places the reader in a space of, okay, understanding the big, the small, and the now.
And it exposes the illusion of that. And I think, frankly, most power structures, any kind of orthodoxy, makes you want to think that this is the only way and this is forever. And basically, when anybody is trying to tell you that, either one of those things, you should smell a rat.
Yes.
It's a scam. It's a scam, and it's an effort to control you and enable some other entity to do what it wants to do to you or around you. And those are, two of the signals. And I've grown acutely sensitive to that, and but it's amazing how people step into that. And I'm the only one who can fix it. And how many people will actually believe somebody who says that? Or we have to destroy it all. That's the only solution, to this problem that confronts us. Or you need to buy this truck that is actually the equivalent of 3 small cars, in order to be a player. And it just shocks me how easily we'll sort of accept that. We'll just step into that. And I'm constantly wondering, how am I being fooled? And, which lines have I fallen for? What illusion am I living in right now? And, my son is of the persuasion that, the whole thing is an illusion. It's everything is constructed. And I'm a little more conservative than that, but it's a combination, and that's and I think again that what we're seeing now, whether you're watching American politics or you're watching American petroleum, is the grinding of the dissonance, the grinding of the reality against the message. And they're so clearly out of phase with each other. It's so clearly, they're so clearly inconsistent. And when you look at how climate denial works now versus what we're all experiencing, and people's concept of what summer is and what it means is literally changing. Like in the past 5 years, people who used to look forward to summer are now dreading summer. It's so backwards. And again, when you think about being a human being, for our whole history, especially if you're in the Northern Hemisphere and in the temperate latitudes, summer was this, it was a time of, hard work often, but it was also a time of, so much light and so much bounty. That was a time to really look forward to. That was the sweet spot of humanity.
Quite literally. Yeah. It was the berries. It was the sweet. It was the fruit.
Yeah, exactly. And now it's turning into something else. And we've never had that ever. So this is new for not just for us, but for our whole species. And, at that we've only just begun, to scratch the surface of the implications of that. And it's all going to happen to us, and we're going to be scratching our heads wondering what happened to us. But I'm trying to anticipate that, in a small way.
I want to thank you as we begin to wrap up here, because I think that, sometimes when I'm digging into this stuff, I can get lost in the way that our world has been almost fabricated. When you look at all of the pieces of marketing and the way that it has been pushed forward, and wanting to flay it open, wanting to lay it bare, wanting to see the truth of it. And I think that what you're doing is really showing your own process of how you peel back those layers so that other people can begin to do the same. And I think that this is critical right now in this moment of time. And I want to pair that thought with something I came back to. This was from Fireweather, but I think that there were passages that would be similar from The Tiger, right? That we have this felt sense, this intuitive sense, this other type of perception where whether you're standing in your Uri Trush and you're standing in the jungle and you can't see the tiger, but you know that the tiger sees you 100 times before you see it once, and you can feel it. And in this, you talk about the fire, and I'm going to read this. Here are sights and sounds, frequencies of perception that are instinctively wrong, that tap into our primal animal sensibility and tell us it's time to go now. It can be the tone of someone's voice or the pitch in a gust of wind. It can be the screech of tires, the lurch of an airplane, or a sudden movement by a stranger. And you go on, that it's a moment beyond which we are moved involuntarily to a state of high alert. And I think that this moment, this time right now, I think many of us are feeling something else, that other perception, that sense of this is now.
Yeah. This is the zeitgeist for sure. And, you can only hope you'll hit it, and fire weather hit it, I think. And, it literally came out in the United States on the day that Manhattan skies turned orange. And that was the day that the book was released. And it took a while for people to dial into it, but a lot of people have. And it's really reaching into corners of readership that I've never had access to before. And it's because we're all feeling it. And this, I'm feeling it too. And I really work hard to articulate what that's like to be a human being in this moment of awakening. And
and urgency, which we talked about at the of urgency.
And we're all feeling that. That sense of high alert, is hitting all of us in different ways, whether you care about, democracy or human rights or the environment or how small plastic particles, get into every part, part of our being. That all of that is in play right now, and because of the nature of way information moves and just the speed of our culture, first accelerated by petroleum and then by the internet and IT in general, we have no idea how fast we're moving right now, and but we're moving faster than anyone's ever moved, than anything has ever moved, and so there's this sort of sense of kind of hurtling and funneling to some kind of a head. And it's going to be it's going to be a hydra of heads. But we're in it now. We're kind of in the chute, as it were. And a number of people, are trying to find language and images and frameworks to get a grip on that and figure out how they might respond. And that's the metaphor, the powerful metaphor of the Fort McMurray fire is they went from feeling inviolable to overrun literally in a period of hours. And then what do you do? How do you respond? And these are, primal questions. And we're at a pivotal moment in our history. And that's not an exaggeration. We're really here. We're really in it now.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast. If what you found resonated with you, may I ask that you share it with your friends or leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts? This act of reciprocity helps others find Mind, Body, and Soil. If you're looking for more, you can find us at groundworkcollective.com and at Kate_Kavanaugh, that's KATE_KAVANAUGH on Instagram. I would like to give a very special thank you to China and Seth Kent of the band All Right, All Right for the clips from their beautiful song Over the Edge from their album The Crucible. You can find them at All Right, All Right on Instagram and wherever you listen to music.